Hey everyone, hope you are all doing well. I apologize for the lack of episodes with Denny. We've been scheduling and canceling. My wife works with seniors, so we're just trying to be extra cautious. Obviously, tea drinking is not something you can do with a mask or anything like that, or even socially distanced in the case of TDB. I suppose we could do Zoom sessions, but we have decided that to not do this. So we've only met up maybe once or maybe twice since the pandemic has really began. So we're just trying to be really cautious of that. Encourage everyone to follow the public health guidelines in their area as well. So today I am starting off a line of fall and winter episodes, requesting some questions for question and answer episodes, so please do send those in as well. But today I'm going to be talking a little bit about reference teas, classic teas, and then I'm going to be bringing on this Jiaji tool, which I had shipped to me from MX all the way back in February or March, and I only got this a few months ago in July. So it's been a long episode coming. I've been intending to do this for a while. But first, going to talk a little bit about, because this is such a classical tea, and I think it could also be a good reference tea, going to be talking a little bit about that. So, reference teas and classic teas. So, I guess in some sense, this is a classic tea. It is a Xiaguan tea. Xiaguan is known for their tuochas, their raw teas. This is one of the teas that they make every year. Just because it's a classic tea doesn't necessarily mean, or classic in the sense of something like a 7542 or an 8582. Doesn't necessarily mean it has to be expensive. This tea is from 2005. I do not consider this to be an expensive tea. I'll talk a little bit more about that once we get into the tea. So it's a little 100-gram tuocha, just about polish this off. So it's something I've been drinking pretty regularly. And you can find these green, doesn't take long to find a Green Box Xiaguan Jiaji tool, which stands for Grade A. And it's considered one of the sort of standard line Xiaguan teas. They have some other tuochas that would also sort of fit that category, but there's also things like the 8653, which is not exactly the same thing as 7542, but sort of occupies that same sort of mid-sized leaf grade niche. So yeah, there's a reason why you should try these teas. They're teas that are constantly talked about, especially in the sinosphere, people that are interested in those sorts of things. So I do recommend people go out. They get repetitions on things like 8582, 7542, things with different storage, Jiajis, 8653s. I think those are all good reference points to have, because these are more teas that are experienced by a lot of different people with lots of different storage. So understanding sort of the difference of what storage can do, what age can do to these teas, I think is really, really valuable. Another thing. All right, so let's talk a little bit about reference teas. So I don't think reference teas need to be classical teas. For me, I think of reference teas a little more personally. They're teas that maybe I own a tong of or something like that. This big old thing back here. They're teas that I just know really well. They're teas I've had a lot, and I feel like I have a pretty good understanding of them. For me, these reference teas are really, really helpful when thinking about whether I want to buy another tea or not. If I'm not sure, for instance, I could have like a reference iwu. So let's say Yangqing Hao Lingya, a tea that I have finished a cake of, basically. So it's a tea I know pretty well. I've had it regularly. I know what the price is. And if I were considering buying another iwu from maybe that same era, that the Lingya is 2007, so like an iwu from 2006, I might have that tea and think about how I like those teas compared to each other. And that can be very informative in making a decision. You could even do a side-by-side comparison. I think that'd be a pretty apt use of a side-by-side comparison. So I think this tea, in that sense, while I've finished the tool just about, so which means I've had probably 13, 14 sessions with this, it's a tea I'm starting to get to know, and I could see this being a pretty good reference tea as well, especially for sort of these mid-2000s factory productions. Generally, these tuochas will have smaller, tippier leaves. I don't actually own a ton of tuochas that I drink regularly, so in that sense, I think it could be a pretty interesting tea in that respect too. Because I like it, and it's something I can drink regularly too, and I think it'd be a useful comparison just because in many ways it is a fairly I don't know, it fits a certain subcategory of Xiaguan just very, very well. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that as I brew this tea. I apologize for the camera shift. My camera just ran out of batteries. All right, so just to talk a little bit about this tool, I think one important distinction that I wanted to make is this tea is made by the Xiaguan, just the normal standard factory. It's not a Feitai production, which I think is an important distinction. I think some people, especially in the West, I know I've done this in the past, tend to sort of conflate the two. And, you know, the Feitai commissions, or Feitai basically sort of operates, my standard understanding is sort of like a commission. So their teas may be a little bit different than your sort of standard Xiaguan production. So for instance, the Gold Ribbon Tuocha that I own a handful of and drink semi-regularly is a Feitai production, as is the Love Forever paper tong. So in many ways, the Love Forever, I think, is a pretty bad example of Xiaguan, just in the sense that I think it's pretty atypical of their tea. I think the Gold Ribbon might be a little bit closer to your standard, but I think something like this is probably a much better example of what Xiaguan has to offer than either of those teas, frankly speaking. All right, so I am here. I have steeps number 2 and 3 right here. Judging from the color, I think they might be a little bit too weak, so I may do steep number 4 while I am talking. One thing to note here is just sort of what the ideal storage is for this. This tea is from 2005, so it's 15 years old, and for me personally, I do tend to prefer sort of more humid storage. That's not to say Hong Kong traditional necessarily, but something stored in Southeast China or Hong Kong or Taiwan for teas, especially like Xiaguan. I think especially when it comes to these teas, which I think are just can be quite strong and quite rough early on in a way that's just not very pleasant to drink. I think in particular for these teas, more so than maybe something like an Yiwu tea, I'm going to sort of heavily bias myself towards that Guangdong storage rather than something like Kunming. And I think, so even more so than just sort of boutique teas in particular. So definitely something to keep in mind. I would not be terribly eager to try a 15-year-old Kunming stored version of this tea, just personally speaking, unless I was doing it for sort of the purpose of education. So I bought the 2005 version, which costs now 73 RMB, so that's a little over $10, and the 2010 version, which is actually considerably cheaper, selling for just 25 RMB right now from MXT. I forget what I paid. I may have paid just very slightly less than those. I consider both those prices to be quite reasonable for 10 and 15-year-old tea. So yeah, let's get into it a little bit. So yeah, still a little bit light there. Sort of sweet, very woody flavors, a little bit of pine notes there. Not bringing a ton of that burliness that I would expect to have. So that's why you definitely want to be using some boiling water here. Tuochas sometimes can be a little trickier to brew just because there are some pretty compressed bits in there. Probably something you just need to get a little practice of. Once you start to get some repetitions and things like that, it can be quite a bit easier. So maybe a little stronger. One thing that Xiaguan, of course, is known for is to have pretty smoky tea. This tea, while it certainly could have been smokier earlier, I'd say it's not terribly smoky now. It has some resinous qualities, which I enjoy. A little bit of that sort of grittiness, that mineraliness, gives it a little texture to it, which I like. It just sort of has a basic lingering. One thing I do prefer of Dai teas over Xiaguan is their Xiaguan tends to linger a bit more, have a little bit more depth, at least for me, according to my palate at least. And I enjoy that. And I do tend to be more of a dai guy rather than Xiaguan. But this is a pretty enjoyable tea. This one brewing a little darker, so let's see how it is. It might be a little hot right now. Sticks. Oh yeah, so definitely getting more into that burly category of things for this steep. And yeah, this is, I'd say this steep number 4 is probably more of what I'm looking for. So once the leaves tend to come apart just a little bit, it's a little bit easier to get that sort of consistency. All right, so just finishing up steep number 4 here. This steep in particular convincing me more that this definitely was smoky at some point. Just sort of has that leftover fire taste to it. And I actually quite enjoy that taste. Definitely not something that people that are, I think most people could take this level of sort of retired smokiness. This is not what I would say a super smoky tea. And I think it's an example of how the smoke can sort of pleasantly integrate with the tea as it starts to age. And yeah, this is what you're after, steep number 4 here. So yeah, I mean, it just sort of shows you why it is important to sort of get repetitions, how a single use session is oftentimes not quite good enough to get a feel for it. Because steeps number 1 through 3 here, frankly, I misbrewed it. Should have pushed it just a little bit stronger. Steep number 4 really starting to come into it. So I'll be continuing to enjoy this tea throughout the day. Sort of has a warming, nice aroma, wood, maybe just a slight hint of that sort of minty mentholness, not as heavy as other teas are, but just a bit of that. So while this is not a great tea, it's a very functional one, and it's something where in that 15-year range, 10 to 15-year range, I really start to actually enjoy this tea. So going to give this tea a 5.9 rating. It's enjoyable. It's something I could drink regularly, and I think it does have quite the possibility to improve over time. I think that's another good things about these teas is there's plenty of that sort of like feel, that strength, that bitterness that, you know, can sort of improve over time and be something to drink, and maybe it's even better in another 10 years when it's 25 years old. Real quickly to talk about the 2010 tea, it's a tea I also enjoy. I don't like it quite as much as this 2005. Well, I wouldn't say this 2005 is 3 times better, despite the price. I would tend to buy the 2005 tea just because I consider $11 a tool just to not be that much, and you're going to end up paying for the shipping of the same size object regardless, which sort of can help to sort of even those costs together a little bit. So I think this is a good example of a tea that's worth trying. I do recommend trying. You don't need to necessarily try it from MXT, but I do recommend trying something that's coming from a more humid climate, a Taiwan, a Guangdong, something like that. So sorry for some of the abrupt cuts to this episode. I've been having a couple technical difficulties here. Hope you all enjoyed it. Let me know what you have been drinking. I personally have been drinking a lot of these sort of mid-2000s or just anywhere in that decade factory tea. Something that sort of hits the right price to quality ratio for me as someone that sort of enjoys the semi-aged teas. And I will see y'all soon. Cheers.